Let's pray. Lord God, we pray that you would continue to pour out your Spirit upon your people, that you may continue to raise up people to lead your church and this world forward in seeking to know your Son, Jesus Christ, and living according to the truths of his word. In your name we pray. Amen. So I was visiting one of our members recently at his workplace, and he was taking me around and giving me a tour of the new facility that they had just moved into, and he was telling me a little bit more about his role in that company. And as we were walking around and talking, he shared that the company had begun to have some recent conversations about succession planning. Because their current CEO, she and her husband, had started the company nearly 30 years before, and they built the company up to over 70 employees, and they just moved into this new facility in order to set themselves up for success in the future. But she was starting to realize, I can't do this job forever. Eventually, I'm going to have to pass on that mantle of leadership to someone else. And she had two sons who were currently also leaders within that company. And so they were beginning to have some conversations about how she would then pass on that leadership to them, both of them having different positions and different perspectives. And I think that's a fairly common question. What does successful succession look like? You talk about that in the business world, but we also talk about that in the church, and we talk about that in our own homes. Because nobody stays in the current role that they're in forever. No pastor stays in his role forever. No parent stays in their role forever. And so eventually you get to this point where you have to pause and ask yourself, how do I pass on that mantle of leadership to the next person, to the next generation? And that's a conversation that I want to have with you as we continue our summer series, Sunday School Stories. We're going to look at the story of Elijah and the Chariot of Fire. But as we look at this story, much more than a story about Elijah being swooped up to heaven in a chariot of fire, it's a story about successful succession. As Elijah, as a prophet of God, passes on the mantle of leadership to a young prodigy by the name of Elisha. And it's a story that's recorded for us in the book of 2 Kings. And 2 Kings itself is a book of transition. The book begins, and the very opening words are, when Ahab died. And so you know that there's a change in the kingdom of Israel. Ahab has been the king for 22 years, and now there's a change in political leadership. But even more than that, there's a change in spiritual leadership. Because you get to 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1, and it says, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven. And this is more significant because Ahab, he wasn't the greatest of kings. There were probably a lot of people who weren't sad to see someone else step in as his successor. But Elijah, on the other hand, Elijah was considered probably one of the greatest of all time when it came to prophets. We talk about that sometimes. Someone is the greatest of all time, the GOAT. So we talk about that in the sporting world where someone, whether it's Muhammad Ali or Michael Jordan, is the best of the best at what they do. And you look at who Elijah was as a prophet, and he was considered one of, if not the greatest of all time amongst the Old Testament prophets. Which is perhaps why when Jesus steps onto the scene and starts teaching with power and doing all of these miracles, people start wondering, maybe this is Elijah come back to us. So just to give you a little sense of Elijah's resume, 3 different things that Elijah did throughout his career. And there's many more than this, but I just want to highlight these 3 things. Elijah was a queen confronter, he was a Baal beater, and he was a God meter. So his public ministry actually starts as he goes to sadistic, narcissistic Queen Jezebel And he tells her, because of your idol worship, this land is going to see no rain for the next 3 years. Can you imagine? 3 years with no rain. Like the month of June was a pretty dry month for us here in Carver County. Maybe there were 3 weeks where we didn't really have any significant rain. And you look what that did to the ground and how it started to harden, and maybe some of the plants started to struggle and shrivel up a little bit. But 3 years with a drought? I mean, that's a big deal. But Elijah did that. He was bold. He was brave to go to the queen and to put her in her place. The next thing that Elijah was he was a Baal beater. So think about epic showdowns that have happened throughout history. There's some pretty epic showdowns throughout history. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and their duel back in 1804, or Joe Frazier versus Muhammad Ali in 1971. But you look at the Bible, and perhaps the most epic showdown of all time is between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And the premise is simple. They build 2 altars. They put a bull on each altar, and each of the prophets, so Elijah, all by his lonesome, and all of the prophets of Baal have a chance to call on their so-called God. And whichever God sends down fire to burn up the bull, that God will be declared to be the one true God. And by the end of that epic showdown on Mount Carmel, guess what the people are chanting? The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Which, by the way, in Hebrew is Elijah. Elijah. That's what the name Elijah means. He was showing people by his very name that the Lord was the one true God. A God who he went on to meet just moments after he's on Mount Carmel. You think about people having this longing to see God, to hear God in their lives. And in the Old Testament, that happened very infrequently. In fact, there were only 2 people who got to see God face to face. Moses on Mount Sinai as he received the 10 Commandments, and Elijah on Mount Horeb, which, by the way, is just another name for Mount Sinai. So they both meet God on the same mountain. And Elijah hears God speak to him in a still, small voice. By the way, what's interesting is if you fast forward to the New Testament, you see Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration as he reveals all of his glorious splendor to some of his disciples. And who appears with him on that Mount of Transfiguration? 2 Old Testament figures, 2 prominent figures who are the only 2 who ever saw God face to face on a mountain, Moses and Elijah. So this is quite a resume, which leaves, as Elijah gets to the end of his ministry, that leaves quite a gap. Because Elijah, as great as he isn't going to be able to stay in that role forever. And that's one of the things that he realizes in that time that he spends with God at Mount Horeb. And that's the first step for us in successful succession, is to recognize that you will one day be succeeded. You're not going to be able to stay in the role that you're in forever. One day you will be replaced. And yet, here's the great thing. Here's the good news. God is the one who raises up people to replace each of us. And so while the person might change, so while Elijah wasn't going to be able to stay in his role as prophet, while the person might change, the position continues. And so God, during that time of meeting with Elijah on Mount Horeb, reveals to him someone to be his successor. He says in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 16, I want you, when you go down from this mountain, I want you to go to Elisha, son of Shaphat, and I want you to anoint him as your successor. So he goes down the mountain, he finds Elisha, and Elisha is out in the field with a yoke of oxen. It's one of 12 sets of oxen that he has, which reveals to you that Elisha was a very successful businessman. Which, when you're looking for someone to succeed you, look for people who are succeeding already, maybe in another area of life. So Elijah comes to Elisha while he's plowing, and he comes up to him, and he takes his cloak, and he puts his cloak around Elisha. And this is really, really significant because a cloak for a prophet symbolized their status. It symbolized God's Spirit resting mightily upon them. It's similar to a pastor, where a pastor will wear a stole in ministry. And that colorful stole represents his status, his position, his role as God's Spirit rests upon him, that he is yoked to Christ, to the truth of God's word, and to lead people toward Jesus. And so Elijah takes his cloak and he puts it around Elisha, as if to say, what I have done, God is now calling you to. And that brings us to the second step in successful succession planning, is identify someone to be your successor. For Elijah, it's identifying Elisha with the help of God. You are going to be the one that replaces me. You're going to be the one that carries on my role. But I think all of us have to begin to think about that in our lives. Eventually, we're going to be replaced. Eventually, we're not going to be able to do whatever role we're currently doing, whether it's a role in the business world, whether it's a role in the church, whether it's a role in our own homes. Speaking of homes, I was talking to one of the men from this congregation who has participated in some of the men's mentoring training that I have done. And he shared with me a story about his dad who has been the patriarch of the family, the spiritual leader of the home, the one who when everyone gets together as family, he's the one who leads the prayers. But his dad is now in his 80s. And so recently, his dad pulled him aside and said, son, I want you to start leading the family prayers. And this gentleman is in his 50s. And he realized, my dad's not going to be able to carry on in his role of spiritual leader much longer. But his dad identified him to carry on that role. This is what Elijah is doing with Elisha. I'm not going to be able to stay in this role much longer, but I want you to carry that role on. And so 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 21 ends with these words. Then he set out to follow Elijah and to become his attendant. And that takes us to step 3 in successful succession planning, is that we look for someone who can become an attendant who pays attention. And that word attendant is really, really critical for our conversation because it's that same word that's used to refer to who Joshua was to Moses. He was an aide. He was an attendant to him for many years as God's people traveled through the wilderness. And there are some parallels between the successful transition between Moses and Joshua and between Elijah and Elisha. So, moving forward in the story, for the next number of years, Elisha now follows Elijah around. And he watches, and he listens, and he learns from him, and he helps him wherever that help is needed, knowing that one day, everything that his master Elijah does, he's going to have to carry on. And that brings us to our text from 2 Kings chapter 2. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal, one of the local cities. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets, and just to pause there and explain, Elijah had set up a number of, we'll call them seminaries in the local communities. And he would raise up a company of prophets. So this is a group of seminary students that he has trained who are now coming out to Elisha, and they asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." There's a little bit of lamenting going on here, a little bit of grieving. He knows this is the final day that he gets with the person who has been his mentor. This is like a mom who knows that the next day she's going to have to say goodbye to her son as he goes off to college or as he enters into basic training. Someone says, "You know, this is the last day you get with him." "Yeah, I know, but let's not talk about that. Let's not bring that up right now." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. You see what's happening here? There's a repetition as Elijah is walking from town to town. Every town that he stops in, he turns to Elisha and he says, "Stay here." Now, if you look at the commentaries, what's going on is Elijah is testing the commitment of Elisha. And that's the next step in successful succession planning, that we ask for commitment to the task. Even though Elisha has followed Elijah around, he realizes that soon he's going to pass that mantle of leadership. And so he gives Elisha an option. He says, "Hey, if this is too much for you, you don't have to go on with me. You can just stay here." And each time, Elisha says, "Nope, I'm committed. I'm going to stay with you to the very end." Let's continue reading. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, remember the significance of that, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. Now, have we seen this anywhere else in Scripture? Yeah, it's a flashback to Moses, where he raises his rod and he parts the waters of the Red Sea. But not only does Moses do that, but his successor, Joshua, successfully does that as well. As the people are preparing to enter into the Promised Land, to cross over the Jordan River, the same Jordan River that now Elijah and Elisha are crossing through, God allows Joshua to part those waters. And by the way, when waters part scripturally, this signifies a new era. So when Moses parted the waters of the Red Sea, it was a new era from slavery to freedom. When Joshua parted the waters of the Jordan River, it was a new era from wandering around in the wilderness to having that permanent place that they could stay in the Promised Land. And now here, when the waters of the Jordan are parting, this is a new era. God is preparing to pass that mantle of leadership from Elijah to Elisha. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" And notice what he says. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. And this is the fifth and final, and I believe the most important key to successful succession. Successful succession depends on the Spirit's possession. See, if this transition of leadership is going to happen, it's not contingent upon Elisha being an effective leader. It's not contingent upon all the training that he has received. It's contingent ultimately upon God's Spirit resting upon him. And so Elisha, he looks at his mentor and he says, if I'm going to take on this mantle of leadership, then my one request is that as mightily as God's Spirit has rested upon you, I want that same Spirit to rest on me twice as strong. Because he knows that as difficult as the ministry was for Elijah, it's going to be difficult for him. You have asked a difficult thing, Elijah said. Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not. He says, if you see me when I'm taken, then your request is answered. If you don't see me, well, it's not. So let's find out what happens. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. So suddenly, out of nowhere, there's this dramatic scene where a chariot of fire swoops down. And fire is significant because fire scripturally symbolizes the presence of God. And we've seen this show up in the story of Elijah before. So when Elijah is on this showdown at Mount Carmel, what does God send from heaven? To signify that he is the one true God. He sends down fire. And when Elijah is on Mount Horeb and God appears to him, there's fire that comes down. And so God comes down in a chariot and horse of fire. And he takes Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind. I appreciate what one of the commentators said here. He said, this just makes sense that Elijah would be taken to heaven in a whirlwind because that describes his ministry here on earth. It was a whirlwind as he went in and he tore things up in the palace of idol worshipers. And so the way that he lived his life is the way that he left his life, in a whirlwind. But what's most significant about the story is not the way that Elijah was dramatically taken. What's significant is the words that come next in verse 12. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Because remember, Elisha's request to have God's Spirit rest upon him is contingent upon what? Seeing his master, seeing his mentor taken. So what happens next? Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. And what does the cloak symbolize? It symbolizes the status of a prophet upon whom God's Spirit rests. And he took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. And when he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. And the company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. And a successful succession plan is made and a transition happens. And you follow the story forward from here. And Elisha performs all of these mighty acts, probably even more than his predecessor had. So he goes back from here and he parts the waters. And then he makes an axe head float. And then he feeds 100 people, foreshadowing Jesus feeding 5,000. And he raises a widow's son back to life. And he heals a foreign commander named Naaman's leprosy. And the list goes on. And why is he able to do all of these things successfully? Because of the Spirit's possession. Because he has God's Spirit. And that's the key for all of us. And that's what I want to come back to as we wrap things up. What does successful succession planning look like? Successful succession depends upon the Spirit's possession. And I'm not sure where you're at right now in a succession plan. I'm not sure where you're at right now in a time of transition. Some of you might be at that stage in life where you are preparing to pass on that mantle of leadership to somebody else. You might be at the retirement stage. You might be at that stage where you're nearing the end of your life and you're realizing my days are limited. Some of you might be on the other side and you're being raised up to step in and carry on that mantle of leadership that those who have gone before you have done. Here's what I know. All of us eventually are going to find ourselves in a time of transition. We're going to find that in our workplace. We're going to find that in our churches. We're going to find that in our homes. Even here in our congregation right now, we're going through a time of transition. This week, Katie Litzau has started as a new director of youth and music ministry. So we as a church, we're going through this time of transition. And what makes that successful transition possible? It's not about all of the past experiences that person has. It's not about the skill set that they bring. Ultimately, that's dependent upon that person possessing God's Spirit. And so this is what I would invite us to pray as we find ourselves in a time of transition, as we find ourselves in a place of succession, to say, God, I want your Spirit to rest powerfully upon me and upon those who come after me. See, the truth be told, we're all going to die. None of us is going to stay alive in this world. But even when we die, guess who continues? God's Spirit does. And so just as Elijah passed that Spirit on to his successor, Elijah, that Spirit, that mantle of leadership has been passed on to future generations. And so our prayer is, God, put that same Spirit upon me. And then when it's my time to transition and to pass that mantle on to somebody else, Lord, put that same Spirit upon them. I'll close with this. So I have a friend from seminary who serves as a pastor right now in Chicago. And one of the things that he's been studying is the formation of congregations in Chicago and how they've made successful transitions. And recently he posted on Facebook about his new favorite pastor, a man by the name of Marmaduke Carter. I mean, with a name like that, what a great guy. So Marmaduke Carter started a congregation in Chicago called St. Philip's Lutheran Church. And he served as the founding pastor there and senior pastor for 33 years. Built a very successful congregation. And at his retirement, that very same service was the installation of his successor. And at that service, Marmaduke Carter took his stole, which symbolized his status, his role as shepherd of that congregation, and he took that stole off and he placed it on his successor. And what a powerful image to say that same Spirit that rested upon him, that gave him success in starting and establishing that congregation. He was saying, now, Lord, I pray that that same Spirit is present upon my successor. May we continue to live that way in our lives, in whatever time of transition that we find ourselves, whether in the workplace, in the church, or in our homes, realizing that successful succession is dependent upon the Spirit's possession. Amen.